his job bring him closer to Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Yamunatira Banacharya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Ashto Tarasata Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Abhay Charana Ravinda Bhakta Swami Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Founder-Acharya Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Ashto Tarasata Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavindiki Namacharya Sharagasta Kuriki Prem Sakaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivsari Gaur Bhaktivindiki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogapadan Shamakunda Radha Kundgiri Govardhaniki Braj Bhumi Shivindavadamiki Navdeep Mayapur Dhamiki Purushtam Chetra Jaganapuri Dhamiki Gangamai ki, Jamunamai ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Tulasi Maharani ki, Samabeta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi, all glories to some bodies, all glories to some bodies, all glories to some bodies, all glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Garanga, all glories to Prabhupada ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Iti Tan Api Rajendra. Iti Tanapi Rajendra. Iti Tanapi Rajendra. Praja Saga Dio Muni. Praja Saga Dio Muni. Praja Saga Dio Muni. Iti Tanapi Rajendra. Praja Saga Dio Muni. Upetya Narada Praha. Upetya Narada Praha. Upetya Narada Praha. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Upetya Narada Praha. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Iti Tanapi Rajendra. Prajasaga Dio Muni. Upetya Narada Praha. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Iti Tanapi Rajendra. Prajasaga Dio Muni. Upetya Narada Praha. Vacha Kutani Purvavat. Prajasaga Dio Muni. Nikitanapi Rajendra Nikitanapi Rajendra Iti, thus, tan, them, the sons of Prajapati Daksha known as the Shavalasvas. Api, also, Rajendra, O King Parikshit, Prajasagadiya, who were under the impression that begetting children was the most important duty. Muni, the great sage. Upetya, approaching. Narada, I guess you know what that means, right? Narada. Praha, said. Vacha, words. Kutani, enigmatic. Purvavat, as he had done previously. So in this verse, there's a few quite interesting words here. One thing that stands out to me is this Prajasagadiya, who were under the impression that begetting children was the most important duty. It's quite often the case that when you have conversations with people, especially a community coming from India, and they start talking about your son, and what the first thing they generally ask is he married yet? It's like that's the most important thing in life. And we know also, I speak often with the Brahmacharis here, and when their parents hear that they've moved into the Brahmacharya ashram, it's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen to them. They're taking shelter of spiritual life. And so we see that for people who are somewhat materialistically inclined to have progeny to expand the kingdom, this is really important. But for those who are spiritually inclined, the most important thing is to become God conscious, to come to the situation where we're actually pleasing Krishna. And of course, you can please Krishna by having children. There's not a problem there. But Prabhupada would often say that Krishna consciousness means taking the I out of everything and putting Krishna in the center of everything. So if our purpose in having children is to have God-conscious children, then that's perfectly okay. But if our purpose in having children is simply to expand our dynasty and to expand our name and fame, then this is a great anartha. This is a big, big problem. So this is an interesting point here. And the other word here that's really interesting is this kutani. Now there's a word in the Bhagavad Gita which says kuta. Kutastvam kashmalam midam. So Krishna's saying, does anyone know what this word means? Where from? Where from? He's puzzled. It's like a quizzical expression. It's like, where does this come from? So in the same here, the kutani is being used to indicate a mystery. So the words that Narada Muni is presenting to the Shavalashvas, as he presented the Haryashvas, are a mystery. But who are they a mystery to? Obviously not the Haryashvas, because they understood very clearly the 10 points that Narad Muni made. Who are they a mystery to? Common man, materialistic people. They're completely bewildered about it. I was having a conversation last night with one of the devotees here, and they were talking about their father. And they were just talking about, it's like devotees sometimes, they talk about the body and the things that go on. And for devotees, it seems like they don't really mind discussing the shortcomings or the pitfalls of having a material body and how it's just oftentimes it's just a source of difficulty and a source of embarrassment, really, in one sense. But then they were talking about their father, and their father had this disease, similar disease as what they had, but they felt their father felt very embarrassed by it, and actually it was like a blur on his manhood, if you like, and therefore he didn't discuss it not even with his family. His family didn't even know he had this disease for many, many years until he had to have an operation, because of this deep identification with the body. He wasn't able to discuss it because he felt that this was a reflection upon him. Yet we see with devotees, okay, we may not be completely off the bodily platform. We may not have progressed that much along the path, but at least we have this at least theoretical understanding we're not this body, and that the pains and pleasures of this body are not directly connected to me. There's something separate. And this Prabhupada will discuss this in the Prabhupada. But I just thought this is like some of the ways that Prabhupada uses the words and translates the words to help us understand the point that's being made here. Very, very important. This word enigmatic, it means mysterious or very difficult to understand. I actually had to look it up. I'm not a very educated person, so I had to look it up to see exactly what it meant, because it's not a word that I commonly used. But it means something that's, it's mysterious. And the science of bhakti is very, very, very mysterious to those who are not spiritually inclined. Very mysterious. And we see that, if you try to present Krishna consciousness to someone who's a materialistic person, the general reaction is like, oh, this is all just mythology, or this is just all some phantasmagorical stories, and all these types of things. Why don't you just deal with the reality? You often hear them say, I'm interested in reality. This is just all fantasy, what you're talking about. Someone who's a young boy, he's able to lift a mountain and hold it above his head for 7 days on the little finger of his left hand, or he can suck the life out of a big demon, or he can kill. You look at some of these stories of Krishna. I even remember one time we were traveling in Tasmania, and there was a group of us together, and we were reading the Krishna book. Every night we'd read Krishna book and have hot milk. And so we were discussing this story of Dvidvita the gorilla. And some pretty fantastic things were explained in this story of Krishna fighting with Dvidvita. And at one point, one of the devotees, he said, "Who wrote that book?" He was just like really puzzled that this sort of thing could even happen, or that it's being recorded in a book. Because oftentimes we also see that the books we read when we're growing up and stuff, they're all just fiction. It's just all some stories. So people are habituated to fiction. They have movies and all this. It's all just fiction. All the stuff you see on television is just fiction. But our understanding is the scriptures deal with fact. They deal with things that have actually happened or are going to happen in the future. Just like we see in the 13th chapter of the first canto, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari and Vidura have left Yudhishthira's palace, and Yudhishthira is lamenting. And then Narad Muni, he basically philosophically explains to Yudhishthira why he shouldn't lament. But then what he does is he tells him what's going to happen. Because Narad Muni, being a pure unalloyed devotee of Krishna, he can see the future. He has this capacity where he can see the future. So he tells him, this is what's going to happen. And then he says, they're going to the southern side of the Himalayas. They're going to sit down there and meditate. And so many days from now, that Dhritarashtra he will, due to the process of meditation, his body will burn up, and Gandhari will enter into the flame. So he explains what's going to happen, and we understand this is to be a fact. It's not just some speculation, it's the fact of what happened. And also we see the Bhagavatam, it also describes to us how this age is going to develop. You see the 12th canto, it tells us very, very precisely. Keep in mind, this book was written 5,000 or documented or written down 5,000 years ago. And we see that the things that are being described in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam are actually becoming true. They're happening, they have happened. Even though it was written 5,000 years ago, we can see that what's being described there is happening, has happened, and will happen. And even it describes that towards the end of this age, then the Lord will appear as Kalki. So we can understand this will happen. The Bhagavatam is very, very important literature, and it's dealing with the reality of this material world. And the whole purpose of the Bhagavatam is to inspire us to give up attachment to this material world, become God conscious, and return back to the spiritual world. So it's a very, very important literature. All right, so I'll read this. There's no purport to this translation, but I'll read the next one as well. O King Parikshit, Narad Muni approached these sons of Prajapati Daksha, who were engaged in tapasya to beget children, and spoke enigmatic words to them, just as he had spoken to their elder brothers. Responsively, O King Parikshit, Narad Muni approached these sons of Prajapati Daksha, who were engaged in tapasya to beget children, and spoke enigmatic words to them, just as he had spoken to their elder brothers. So text 30. Dakshayana sangshutna gadato nigavam mama anvichatanupadavim bratrinam bratrivatsala. Translation. O sons of Daksha, please hear my words of instruction attentively. You are all very affectionate to your elder brothers, the Haryashvas. Therefore, you should follow their path. So, also, very interesting verse here, where Narada is saying to the Savalashvas, please hear my instructions attentively. We see the same thing Krishna says. We know with the Bhagavad Gita it's broken into 3 distinct sections, and the middle 6 sections are kind of like the essence of the instruction. And the very first verse in the 7th chapter, which is the beginning instructions, Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, now hear from me, O son of Kunti, how by practicing yoga and full devotion for me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. And there's a nice class that Prabhupada gave here in Melbourne Temple in 1973 or 4, I think it was, where he emphasizes these words, touch trinu, just here. He really emphasizes this point. And Prabhupada is pointing out how we need to hear attentively, because if we listen carefully, we can actually understand the transcendental science. Whereas we don't listen attentively, we don't try to properly understand the instruction, just like we see with the Haryashvas, Narada explained to them in simple how many more of these you got in the cupboard? So in 4 verses he explains these, uses allegories, so he's giving an example to tell a story. But because the Haryashvas listened, because Narad Muni was potent, and because they were receptive and also themselves fertile, their intelligence was quite fertile. Prabhupada often uses the example of when a man and a woman get married. If the man is potent and the woman is fertile, then children will result. So we see here that in the beginning of the story, Narad Muni is certainly potent. He's a very, very potent preacher, extremely potent. And I remember years ago listening to a Bhagavatam class in Vrindavan, and the speaker was explaining that it's just like with you can listen to the Bhagavatam, the same verse you could listen to from many different speakers, and you'll get different understandings from listening to that verse. But then if you listen to the same class from someone of the depth of realization of Srila Prabhupada, this knowledge, that what he's presenting, just goes straight to the heart. So we can see with someone like Narad Muni, because he has this depth of understanding, that when he's presenting the scriptures, when he's presenting the knowledge to different devotees, that it goes directly to their heart and that they understand it. And also because the Haryashvas were fertile, their consciousness was quite fertile, and they listened very carefully, then they received this knowledge. And the same thing is going to happen here with the Shavalashvas, because they are also quite elevated, they have clear consciousness, and they listen attentively to Narad Muni's instructions. Therefore, this instruction goes to their heart and they understand Narad Muni's point. They get the point, and therefore they give up their attachment to performing these tapasya, in order to beget children, and realize that the point of tapasya, as I was explaining the other day, Rishabh Devi explains at the beginning of the 5th chapter of the 5th canto, he says, Tapo divyam putrakayena shatvam shudyad yashmad brahma sokyam tvanantam, that the point of tapasya is not to gain some material benefit. But many people do that, especially those who are karmakandya. They follow tapasya in order to get some material benediction, in order to get some material gain. But the real point of tapasya is to understand the divine. Otherwise, you're just wasting time. And we've been here for countless lives. There's many prayers in the Bhagavatam pointing out that we should actually use this life to understand the Supreme, to understand what is our duty. I was quoting this verse the other day in the 7th canto. Prahlad Maharaj, he says, Komaram ashar pragao damam bhagavatam durabam manasam tarapi adruvamartadam. That, an intelligent person from the very beginning of their life should use this human form of life to practice Dharma. And the point of Dharma is to understand who I am, who is the Supreme Person of Godhead, and therefore what is my duty. No, it's not just to have some kind of comfortable material life. We see that it's quite common that people see that the 4 goals of life are Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So for them, Dharma means you follow the religious duties, but it's more about having a pious life, more about getting a good situation in this life. It's got not really that much to do with understanding God. It's a very materialistic approach to religion. And we see throughout the world so many people practicing religion, their approach is largely material. If they're seen as being pious people, they think they've had a successful life. But in devotional service, in the process of bhakti, this is not the goal. The goal is the ultimate satisfaction of Krishna. And this point is made, I think it's in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto. There's a few verses there. I don't remember the verses, but I remember the gist of them. And basically it's being explained there that the purpose of life is to actually, samsiddhi haritoshanam, it mentions. There's some siddhi, like siddhi means perfection. Some siddhi means like the complete or the most perfect perfection. Haritoshanam, Hari obviously means Lord. Toshanam means to satisfy Him. So if you satisfy Krishna, you've achieved the complete perfection of life. But then in the next verse it talks about Vana Shama Eva Hi Kevalam. There's actually, if you don't achieve this point of satisfying Krishna, then your endeavors in Vana Shama are a useless waste of time. So the Bhagavatam, and this is the point that's made right in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, where it says that the Bhagavatam kicks out all these different types of cheating religion, and it just focuses exclusively on understanding what is our purpose in life and how to achieve that. This is the point of the Bhagavatam. This is why, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw this as such an important literature, because it's not bothering with all the fluff or the flowery, this Veda Vatarata, all the flowery words of the Vedas. It doesn't bother with that sort of stuff. It just focuses clearly on and exclusively on understanding who is the Supreme Person of God, who am I, and what is my duty, and showing us how to achieve the goal of life. So it's very, very important literature. I read Prabhupada's purport. Narad Muni encouraged Prajapati Daksha's second group of sons by awakening their natural affinity for their brothers. Really, Narad Muni is a first-class preacher, and you'll see here he's using so many different strategies, like with the Haryashvas, they were practicing tapasya. He could see they had very clear intelligence, so he's just going and speaking to them. Now he's saying, okay, the brothers may be somewhat wary of my preaching, therefore I'll use a tactic. So he goes and he says, straight away he said, you should, your brothers who are very affectionate, you're very affectionate too, you should follow their path. Preaching strategy. So? They hadn't even met their brothers, yeah. But he's using, because Prabhupada says here, natural affinity. Even though you haven't met them, as soon as you understand there's a relationship, there's a it's almost like a hardwired affinity. And then we see later on in this chapter, he goes to Daksha using another preaching strategy. He's thinking, okay, he's distressed because his sons have all left him. Therefore, he's possibly thinking of, I should give all this up because, like this, Prabhupada uses introduces this concept of smasan vairagya. So smasan means the burning gut. So when people go when their relatives die, they go to the crematorium or the cremation grounds or whatever, and they're thinking, they start to think, this life is such a misery. Why should I waste my time? I should just give it all up. Just like we saw at the start of the pandemic, it was really interesting. A lot of people were talking about, because they're suffering because of, it was revealed that this pandemic came because of meat eating. It came from these wet markets this is what they're saying, it came from these wet markets in China. Therefore, people were drawing a direct connection between meat eating and the pandemic. So you see, there was a lot of, on social media and stuff, people say, I'm going to give up meat. I'm going to give up eating meat. It's cruel to the animals, but it's actually very bad for your health. But how many people did? It's usually a temporary thing because there's not a lot of depth of realization. But then we see, and the same thing with Daksha. He didn't actually have a lot of depth of realization on that, but But the point I'm making is that that Narad Muni, he's a brilliant preacher, and he uses so many different strategies and tactics to try to awaken people's Krishna consciousness. He urged them to follow their brothers if they were at all affectionate toward them. Family affection is very strong, and therefore Narad Muni followed this tactic of reminding them of their family relationship with the Haryashvas. Generally, the word Nigama refers to the Vedas, but here Nigama refers to the instructions contained in the Vedas. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam says, Nigamat kalpatalo galitam phalam. The Vedic instructions are like a tree of which the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam is the ripened fruit. And we see, like with the Vedas, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu points out that in the Vedas there's actually only three real topics. Does anyone know the topics of the Vedas that Mahaprabhu points out? Sambandha, Abhidaya, Prayojana. They're the only three topics in the Veda. And so we see that the Veda is also talking about who we are, what our relationship is, the process, and the goal. And the Bhagavatam really defines that goal very, very explicitly for us as being, achieving this love of Godhead and going back to the spiritual realm. So therefore we see it's being explained here as this Galitam Phalam, the ripened fruit of the tree of the Veda. Narad Muni is engaged in distributing this fruit, and therefore he instructed Vyasadeva to write this Mahapurana, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, for the benefit of the ignorant human society. So we see, like oftentimes, even in ISKCON, we'll see the same thing, is when a spiritual master has a particular mission that he's eager to push on, he engages his disciples in also promoting and developing that mission. The same we see with Srila Prabhupada. The main thing he engaged his disciples in many things, but the main thing he engaged his disciples in was printing and distributing transcendental literatures, because this was the instruction he received from his guru. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said to Srila Prabhupada, you're an intelligent young man, if you ever get money, I want you to translate and print books in the English language. So he did that, and he engaged his disciples in the same thing. So we see this is like, Prabhupada would often refer to this as the family business. And so we can see here also that this is Narad Muni's business, is he is engaged in propagating Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, or this knowledge of Krishna. So he's engaged his disciples, especially Srila Vyasadeva, in doing that. And then Prabhupada quotes this really wonderful verse from the 7th chapter of the first canto. Anata upashamam sakshad bhakti yogam adhoksiche lokasya janato vidvangs chakri satvata sanghitam. The material miseries of the living entity, which are superfluous to him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature, which is in relation to the supreme truth. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 1.7.6. People are suffering because of ignorance and are following a wrong path for happiness. This is called anartha. These material activities will never make them happy, and therefore Narada instructed Vyasadeva to record the instructions of Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Vyasadeva actually followed Narada and did this. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam is the supreme instruction of the Vedas. Galitam phalam, the ripened fruit of the Vedas, is Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. So we see here this verse that Prabhupada's quoting from the 7th chapter of the first canto. The evolution of the conversation there is chapters 4, 5, 6. Chapter 4 is the appearance of Narad. 5 and 6 is Narad instructing, or his conversation with Vyasa, and then his instructing Vyasa. And then the first 11 verses of the 7th chapter is the sages. I think the sages are asking, what did Narad do? What did Vyasa do after he received those instructions? And so these first 11 verses are explaining that, and it concludes with because then he asks, after this verse he asks, well, why did Sukadeva Goswami, why did he engage in these difficult austerities? And then Sutta speaks the very well-known Atmaram verse, Atmaramas Chumunayo, and explains that the reason he did this was because of his compassionate nature. But in this verse that Prabhupada's quoting here, very, very interesting, he starts off by saying, the material miseries of the living entity which are superfluous to him. So, we find that in this material world that everyone identifies with the miseries that are happening to the body. But as we progress in devotional service, we can see, even though we may not, as I was saying before, we may not be fully understanding this, we may not be fully realized, but we start to understand. In the beginning it's intellectually, but as we evolve it becomes more and more deep, and we actually start to have deep realizations. But these miseries that are happening to us, they're temporary, and they come and go. And Krishna makes this point in so many different ways in the Bhagavad Gita, but one way in particular he talks about is in the, I think it's the 2nd chapter, where he talks about how, he said, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress are just like the appearance and disappearance of summer and winter seasons. They arise from sense perception. Therefore, we need to learn to tolerate these things without being disturbed. So because of sense perception, because we see the body as the self, because we think of the body as the self, but actually this is not us. And all it takes is just a little bit of logical analysis of the situation, where you can see, I had a particular type of body when I was a baby, and now I evolve into a child, and the body changes, and we can see as we go through life how the body is changing. But it's interesting, is, like the things I didn't like when I was, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I still don't like them now. Yeah? I don't like cold weather. I don't like cold showers. I don't like, any of these things. I don't like certain types of food. I still don't like them. No matter how much people try to convince me to eat guavas, I just cannot deal with them. They're just like, no way. But some people love them. But so this is me. This is my particular set of senses. This is my particular guna and karma has put me in the situation where I don't like certain things. I do like other things. And you find that, in certain conditions of life, certain living entities will respond in a very favorable way, and it helps them to, evolve. But other people put in exactly the same position of life, there's exactly the same condition, it's stifling for it, it's restricting, it's limiting. So it's all about the guna and karma sense perception. It's all because I have this particular set of senses, this particular body, which is developed from my karma and situation from previous life. Therefore, in this life, I find things favorable and things unfavorable. But another person, even someone who could be my twin, would find the exact opposite. So this is just guna and karma associated with the particular living entity. And therefore, if we understand how these things have evolved, we can also understand, as I say, at least intellectually beginning, that this is all just due to my particular set of senses. And by contemplating these things regularly and by discussing and trying to understand, then our realization on these things will deepen, and it will come to the point where we actually understand that I'm not this material body, and we'll act on that platform. I'm not this material body, I'm a spirit soul, eternal servant of Krishna. And that's why it's really important that we regularly discuss these topics. And Prabhupada would say to discuss them threadbare, meaning to discuss from all different angles, to see it from all different angles. Okay, it's like, it's easy when you see suffering happen to someone else that you're not the body. You can say, it's quite easy. But when it's happening to you, oh, my back hurts, and it's all me kind of thing, But as we evolve spiritually, we can see that we start to understand more and more how this is not actually me. This is just the machine that's malfunctioning. And it's just like, a friend loaned me his car because he's in Brisbane, so got his car to drive around in. And it has, even though it's a nice car, so-called nice car, it's got certain mechanical faults. But it's just a car. It's just a machine, and it doesn't matter how good a machine you have. At some point, after constant use, they wear down. They start to malfunction. So it's the same with the body. It's just a machine. It's a very sophisticated machine. It's a machine that can repair itself, which is pretty cool. Can you imagine having a car that, someone bangs into your car and like a few minutes later it repairs itself? I reckon you sell a lot of them. But that's what the body's like. It's a machine, but it's a very, very sophisticated machine. But as with all machines, as you use them, they wear down. So as you get older, the lungs are wearing down, the digestion, the whole thing becomes all flabby, because like if you look at the intestines, they're all kind of like, all these little, I don't know what you call it, but they're sort of ribbed areas in it, so it's got a maximum area for absorbing the things that go through it, whatever nutrients you put into it. But then as you get older, the whole thing becomes all flabby and blocked up with, different types of, basically stool and things like that. And then the capacity to absorb is reduced. And then the fire of digestion also, it wears down and things like that. So you can, and that's just a simple example, like joints. As the joints are moving constantly, then what happens is there's little bits of lubricant kept in between, that are placed in between the joints, but that wears out, that dries up. So many things happen like that as you get older. But it's just the machine wearing down. And then by discussing these things and also experiencing these things, we can start to understand there is a separation between the body and the self. And so it's very important, and Prabhupada would regularly encourage devotees to discuss these things threadbare, so we can understand these things very, very clearly. how we're not this body, and we're a spirit soul, and we're Krishna's eternal servant. And we see also here that Prabhupada is quoting this verse here, saying how these sufferings of the material body are superfluous. I mean, they're not actually directly connected with us. But the problem comes is when we identify with the body, then we identify with the suffering of the body. Therefore, we experience it. But if we understand that we're not this material body, we understand that the sufferings of the body are only related to the body, then we are able to detach ourselves from these things. And it gets to the point where they don't actually interfere with your practice of bhakti. They don't actually interfere anymore with your relationship with Krishna. But if we identify with these things, that gives them the potential to interfere with our relationship with Krishna. So it's very important verse here, and many important points that Srila Prabhupada brings out. And we could say so much more, but in the interest of time, I will finish there. Any comments or questions at all? Yes, Priya Mataji. I saw your hand first.
Thank you, Prabhu, for the nice class. My question is, a few verses down, Daksha says that when he gets annoyed that Narada Muni took them away, Daksha says they should have been allowed to procreate and live their life, and then when they're older, then that's their choice if they want to go. So actually in the 9th canto there's an interesting episode where Yadu, who's the son of Pururavas, isn't he?
Who?
Yadu Maharaj, who's the son of Pururavas.
Yeah.
So there what happens is when Pururavas says, I would like one of you sons to exchange your youth with me, Yadu says that I won't do it because he gives a really good explanation. He says that when one is young, he has to be given a chance to enjoy his life. Then he will be properly situated in the next ashram, vanaprastha, whatever. So, like when I read the purport, I thought Prabhupada would slam that. But actually he says it's true what he's saying, that if they are not engaged, those propensities are not properly engaged, then one will not be solidly situated when one actually takes it up. So there's truth in... like Daksha is basically saying that's the natural flow. So I'm saying there is weight in his argument that he puts to Narada Muni.
Sorry?
There is weight in his argument that he puts to Narada Muni, that you shouldn't have taken them straight away.
Yeah, but then you see the same point is there in that pastime you just described as is here, is Daksha's intention is to enjoy his life. And the same as, what's his name? Purava is saying, enjoy his life. But Narada Muni is coming from a completely different angle of vision. He's coming from the absolute perspective, whereas this is a relative perspective, because enjoyment is quite relative. Like for most of you, the weather here is quite nice. But I mean, autumn in Melbourne is a nice time, but it's still a bit cold for me. Yeah, but I see most of you are sitting around in fairly light clothes. I've got a wool hoodie on, because I find it cold here. But that's relative. It's relative to me, and not everyone sees it the same way. But then Narada Muni is speaking absolute instructions. He's speaking about the absolute truth, and he's seeing that these are intelligent people, and therefore he's giving them the opportunity to understand the absolute truth. Whereas Daksha, he's engaging them in begetting children. That is not the absolute truth. That is a relative thing that's associated with this material world. Of course, as I mentioned before, that for devotees to get married and to have children so they can become Krishna, to try to raise Krishna-conscious children, is also an activity connected with Krishna. So it's ultimately liberating, it's ultimately purifying. But we need to understand that those persons who, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, those persons who get married to have children, there are some desires there in their heart. Therefore, they need to get married in order to overcome those desires. Of course, there are people who do get married exclusively for the purpose of doing service for Krishna. But I can tell you for a fact I'm not at that level. And I don't know how many devotees are, but some I'm sure are at that level. But that's a very, very advanced level.
So that was like an express track. That, like in one sense, Daksha was saying like the Varnashrama or whatever, but Narad Muni had the express highway solution.
Yeah. And he's completely transcendental, because these other perspectives are coming from the material plane. It's a material consciousness, ultimately. Even though they may be, we see Daksha, he's a very, very advanced person, a very, very advanced materialist, a very, very powerful materialist. The fact that he could have 11,000 sons is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You know?
So, one more if I can, Prabhu. In the past, the Lord says that although he granted this boon to Daksha, he didn't really favor him. And that was like, wait a minute, how can the Lord not favor someone? And now based on all this, can we say, I was thinking how it's like the child throws a tantrum and the parent says, okay, have it, even though it's not good for you. That classic example Prabhupada gives. So it looks like, would that be a case here? And then when Narad Muni comes, that's why, even though it was against the Lord's instruction, he didn't really... No,
I don't know if Daksha was throwing a tantrum at that point. I think he throws a bit of a tantrum later on where he curses Narad Muni. But the point is like Daksha had material desires. He wanted to be able to procreate, but procreate like very powerfully. And that's why he approached the Lord. And we see sometimes in different pastimes, Krishna will give people material facility, if necessary. But if they're interested in bhakti, and the material facility is ultimately, it's not really a benediction, even though the materialist may think, wow, look at what I've got, Like, so often you meet people, they brag about their material possessions, and you think, well, so what? What does it mean, really? But if the Lord's bestowing his favor upon you, it means he's awarding you with pure unalloyed devotion. And this is a rare thing to achieve. And one can only achieve pure bhakti by the causeless mercy of the Lord. It's not like something you can go out and when you see, like, if you look at the chapter 4 of the first canto, this chapter describes Narad Muni's appearance and how he, after his mother passed away and he left the Mahabhagavat devotees, that he sat down by the water and he meditated upon the Lord, and the Lord appeared out of his causeless mercy. Yet he spent the rest of his life trying to see the Lord again. He didn't appear. Even though a greatly qualified person like Narad Muni couldn't force the Lord's hand. So it's out of great mercy and compassion that we actually get the favor of the Lord.
But the Lord is the well-wishing friend of all living entities. So
that's right.
He should be giving only spiritual benedictions.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's also a matter of qualification. That what's the point of giving something like okay, a child, you get like a 5-year-old child, and they have a toy Lamborghini, and they say, Daddy, buy me a Lamborghini, like a real one. And so you buy the child a Lamborghini, he gets in the Lamborghini, he doesn't know how to drive, and crashes into a pole, kills him. It's by qualification. You get these things by qualification. What's the point of giving someone something they're not qualified to use it? Or giving a child a handgun, a loaded gun. They don't know how to use it. They'll play games with it. They'll shoot their friends, they'll shoot themselves and stuff like that.
But he could have, I can argue for a long time, but he could have given him something tailor-made for him.
He did. He gave him something tailor-made for him. He had the desire to procreate. That was his desire. Unless one's willing to give up these material desires, there's no point awarding them the benediction of pure bhakti, because they'll get that, they'll practice bhakti, but then they'll go back to material desires. One has to cleanse the heart. And this is the point that Prabhupada's making by quoting this verse, anartha upavana shakshat. You have to get rid of these anarthas before you'll actually understand, because the living entity is attached to all these things. They're seeing that this is my path of enjoyment. And as long as they have that desire, this is my path of enjoyment, and this is the desiring to achieve these things, they can never really fully come to the point of bhakti. Bhakti means being free from all these things. Huh? Yes, Mataji?
Thank you, Prabhu. Actually, I just wanted to also ask or comment, I'm not so sure, but when you mean qualification, that would mean more like even free will to some extent, right? Because we see
what?
Free will, because we see that Narada Muni, he instructed Haryashvas and the 1,000 sons, but they just immediately listened to him. They did not argue or anything like that. They just took the instruction and they just followed it. Whereas we see with Daksha, when Narada Muni, after the 1,000 sons, you see, Daksha cursed him. It was almost like a rebel kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I just wanted to say. So it's also the free will, right? Because as we were discussing, that the Lord might want to give, and I think you were saying about qualification,
yeah.
But if you don't have that the desire is not strong enough for first complete surrender to Krishna in one sense. Then, so it's because Krishna won't force his love on us. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, we see with the Haryashvas and the Shavalashvas, is that they were very qualified. They were very learned. They were very renounced. They were very detached. But also they were humble. That was the quality that Daksha was lacking. It didn't have humility. And we see, because, if you look earlier on, Prabhupada, actually Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, and Prabhupada quotes Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, describes that the reason that Daksha wound up cursing him is because there was still some residual envy from his interaction with Shiva, and he was still suffering the effects of his offense to Lord Shiva. And so when Narad Muni preached to his sons to be to follow the path of the Paramahansa, and they did, that envy came up again. And so there's one thing you'll often see is people can practice renunciation, they can practice a spiritual path, and they can practice so many things, sense control, mind control, stuff like that. But if there's residual anarthas within the heart, all you have to do is you push their buttons in the right way, and you'll see that these things will come out. And so, even though Daksha is presenting himself as being an elevated, transcendentalist, so-called, we see that when he was agitated in a particular way, then the anger came out again. So you can understand that's there in the heart. And it's the same for us. And better we don't look at others, their situation, look at our own situation. We see, what's there in my heart that I need to remove, so that when these things happen, that I don't become agitated, but I'm able to think of Krishna. Because you'll see there's so many stories we see in the Bhagavatam where people are pushed in particular ways, and the anger comes out, or the greed, or the lust, or whatever. These things come out. So the process of bhakti helps us to remove these anarthas. That's the whole point of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. This anartha nivritti, it means destroying or removing the anarthas. So Daksha hadn't achieved that point, whereas the Haryashvas and Shavalashvas, because they were humble, they accepted Narada Muni's instructions, and therefore they were able to cleanse themselves of any anarthas they may have had. But because Daksha wasn't humble, because he had envy, therefore he acted in a way that was ultimately not for his own good. And Narada Muni was fine with it. He didn't mind. And you can see this also, this pastime shows you a very distinct difference between a pure Vaishnava and a materialistic person. Materialistic person, as soon as you agitate them, anger, envy, hatred, these things come out. Whereas Narada Muni, a pure Vaishnava, Daksha's cursing him. Like saying some pretty, he's saying some pretty harsh things. In this day and age, someone says these things, so what, But in this time, they're very cultured people. Like Prabhupada's strongest word was rascal. I mean, you call someone a rascal now, they say, well, so is that all you've got? But he's saying, like, if you look at the culture there, you can see that, he's saying, you're not a devotee. You hang out with Lord Vishnu, but you're not qualified to hang out with Lord Vishnu. All these other persons are so much more qualified than you. Narad Muni is very, very highly qualified. But because he doesn't have envy in his heart, because he doesn't have pride, he just, okay. Tata Padram, he says, whatever you offer, that's good. I accept that. Because he's humble, because he's a pure unalloyed Vaishnava. So you can see it's a wonderful pastime for demonstrating the difference between a non-devotee and an advanced devotee. So it's good lessons for us in these pastimes also. Yeah?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Huh? Well, a materialistic person. Yeah, he's a materialistic person. Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely a materialistic person. But I'm making the point is like it demonstrates the difference between the two situations, and how a greatly advanced. Because Prabhupada would say, "Phalena parachiyate," you judge a thing by the results. You can judge something by the symptoms. So we can see with Daksha the way he responded indicated that there was things in his heart. Whereas we can see the way that Narad Muni responded. You can see he's very pure. Yeah.
Not all devotees, devotee is good, but not all devotees are motivated by the same, well, they don't have the same motivations.
Yeah, exactly.
And Narada Muni is quite the epitome of pure devotional service.
Yeah.
So he can go anywhere he likes.
Yeah. And the epitome of a preacher.
Yes.
He's the most amazing preacher. He just takes the holy name everywhere.
Yep. And Daksha is kind of a bit of an attached. He's the epitome of the attached householder.
Yeah. These pastimes are so wonderful to help us understand the situation of the material world. So, and there's a nice purport in the first canto where Srila Prabhupada is glorifying Narad Muni, and he says, we are very thankful to Narad Muni for appearing in the pages of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. So it's very, very nice, because many, many wonderful pastimes with Narad Muni.
A contrast to Daksha is Ambarish Maharaj.
Yeah.
Right. So just because, and this kind of pastime presents the dichotomy between the sannyasis, if you like, and the householders, but and the potential conflict between the two. But if you look at Ambarish Maharaj, he's a very detached householder, and so there's not always that conflict between householders and sannyasis, especially when there's detachment on both sides. But the danger of and this teaches us the danger of householder life is when one's blessed with opulence and position or whatever, that it can be detrimental to your spiritual progress.
Especially if you're attached to it.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi.